Happy Black Friday, everyone. Hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Hope everyone's full. Hope you all got some good Black Friday deals. If not, don't worry. We got Cyber Monday, okay? You know, Cyber Monday is a week that a lot of people forget about. I do. I definitely do. But today I was reminded of that when I went and looked at all the deals that were not there, and I had found better deals before Black Friday. So today, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we're going to talk about how do you pick the right computer components? How do you pick the right motherboard? How do you pick the right power supply? How do you pick the right CPU, the right graphics card, and so on? So without straying away from that too much, we're just going to dive into it. So motherboards, basically you've got, for Intel, you'll usually see like a Z number, and then you'll see like a B number and a few other SKUs, and the Z SKUs are the top kind of like top tier, I should say. Now there's different levels of that, like there's a Z690, Z690 Plus, and so on. But then if you look at like this is the Asus Tough, and then you've got other brands, you've got like whatever. So like for example, I'll give you a good one. Here is an ROG Strix X570, and you see the I, okay, and they have different meanings. Like this is a mini ITX motherboard, and this is a full-size eATX board. Now you'll lose a few features with going with something like this, like you lose the postcode readout, you don't have as many NVMe slots, you don't have as many PCI slots. There's a lot of stuff, okay. Now when you want to look at something like, for example, an X670 or a Z690, you need to figure out what's important to you, okay? Do you use a lot of USB devices? Do you use a lot of PCI devices? Do you use a lot of NVMe devices, like, you know, NVMe drives, like SSDs and stuff? Do you need 2 slots for RAM? Do you need 4? What type of connectors do you need on the back? Now, one thing to note is the type of connectors on the back. The sound card that it has. Do you have a surround sound like I have, where it has a dedicated sub output and a center channel and all that stuff? That matters because, for example, this Aorus X670 Elite is an amazing motherboard. It's really high end. You know, it's not the top, you know, $700-800 motherboard, but it's still a high-end board. It's not a cheap board. It has 2.5 gigabyte LAN. It's PCI 5 ready. It's a great board, but where it falls short on is the sound card, and it doesn't have optical output or the sub out. So basically I'm back to using my old school Sound Blaster external sound card, which is an amazing device. It's old school, but it plugs in USB. Now going back to USB, I've had some people ask me, well, how many USB ports do I need? How many does it have? How many USB-C ports does it have? Typically, USB-C ports on motherboards are limited to 1. Now, you'll find boards like this coming into the market now where it has 2 on the back, but most devices aren't using USB-C. Most devices like your USB, Xbox controllers, PlayStation controllers, all your keyboards, your mice, your microphones, everything uses USB. So they don't really have a big advantage to using USB-C yet because not many devices have it. Now things like your phone would use it, but you can also use a regular USB port. The reason they limit this and they just don't put every port on the board is, 1, those ports do cost money, but 2, they tie up your PCI Express lanes. Now we'll look at this, and this is a Z690 Plus motherboard. It has Wi-Fi, all the features. But if you notice, there's these tiny little traces, and they're little like copper wires that go to each one of these pins, and there's a bunch of pins in here. So this is the front panel connector. So for example, in the top or the front or the side of your case, you'll have USB ports like here, and those actually run from here to the processor, and so they actually use your processor to process this, and there's only so many connections that you can have. So it doesn't matter what processor you choose, it matters what motherboard too, because the motherboard might not have the ability to run all of this stuff on the motherboard, just because they may choose to allocate more PCI Express lanes here for your NVMe drive or your graphics card. So like this is, for example, a gaming motherboard. It says gaming, but you know, some people use that term loosely. In this case, it's kind of designed for gamers. One reason you can look at this and say, hey, it's going to be a good board, is there's VRM cooling, and these VRMs or chokes basically get a lot higher than what most people think. They basically are what kind of balance the load on the power, and basically these get hot as all get out, and if you touch them, they're really hot. Now what happens is if they're too hot, they can become unstable. Your CPU becomes unstable because the heat's not transferring properly and it's soaking in the board. You might have a capacitor pop. There's lots of possibilities that can happen when you buy a cheap motherboard. Now, that's solid. Notice it's not going ting ting because it's not made out of chintzy little cheap sheet metal like some of them are. Some motherboards will put this on here to make you think you're getting a good heatsink, but you're really not. So, something to notate, this board's super heavy. I mean, it's very dense. Some higher end motherboards are thicker too, and it makes, you know, like if it starts flexing over time, it just can last longer. There's lots of little things and gimmicks that they try to sell you on that you don't need, like the thickness of the PCB. But basically, you want to look out for a lot of these things. Now, back to the ports, okay? So here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 USB ports on the rear. Now you'll have your front panel connector, which will connect into here for the front USB, like this type, USB 2 or 3, and then you got your USB-C, which is going to be this one. So it's 2 separate ports, and if you notice, they're going to have 2 separate connections going to the CPU. Now, if they had to choose which one, like some motherboards don't even have a USB-C front connector on it. Like some of your cheaper B550s and stuff, they don't have that. So if you cheap out on a motherboard, you might lose some of these connections. You might lose Wi-Fi, you might have a lesser sound card. So really pay attention to what motherboard features are on there, not so much the price or the brand or the way it looks, but look for what it's gonna have in it. Now, looking back at the Aorus Elite, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 USB ports and 1 C. Now it has HDMI, but it does not have DisplayPort. It does have Wi-Fi, and it does have 2.5 gig Ethernet. Now this has DisplayPort and HDMI. Now with that in mind too, there's a lot of other features like how many VRM stages it has, so if it's good for overclocking or not. You can dive so deep onto these motherboards and find out a lot more by going to different forums, and you can look at like the LTT tier list, and some of these have like power supply tiers and motherboard tiers and NVMe tiers, RAM, you name it. So when you're choosing your components, really kind of dig a little deeper than just you know, trying to see what the price is and stuff. For example, power supplies, you know, they're rated in gold, platinum, bronze, all different things, but that doesn't always mean anything. They could claim it's a gold all day long, but does it perform as a gold? And they do that by the efficiency. And there's different levels of quality and care that they put into these. Like some of the like G5s and G6s are pretty good. But they make even higher end stuff. It might have a really silent fan that just doesn't make any noise, or the fan just might never cut on because it has such good capacitors that transfers the heat so well, and it's like a platinum. It's so efficient that the fan, you'll never even hear that thing cut on. For a minute when I first had this Silverstone, this was an A tier, I literally thought the fan was broke because it never cut on, and I was like, wait a minute, the fan has not cut on one time, and I'm running like a really high-end rig at the time. I looked it up online, they said, oh yeah, that fan has barely cut on mine too, and if it is, it's only cutting on because it's operating at the higher tier of the performance that it can handle. So if it's rated at 700 watts and you're using 700 watts, it might cut on then. But if you're running like 600 watts, for example, it might not cut on just because it's that efficient. That it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to cool it. It has it stayed so cool all the way throughout the load that it's just chilling. Another thing is RAM. You know, a lot of people just buy, oh, let me get 32 gigs of RAM, you know, 3000 speed, 3200, whatever. Well, that kind of does matter on certain things, which it matters on all things, really. But for example, Ryzen 9, you know, with the new 7000 series, You want to run 6,000 speed. It's basically the best bang for the buck also, but it's the sweet spot for Ryzen, as they call it. It's with the Infinity Fabric, and I won't dive too deep into that, but you can look it up. Anyways, timings matter. So if your 6,000 speed is as good as you want to go, then start looking at your timings. For example, this is DDR5 6000 and it's clock 30, 38, 38, 96. These are the timings. These right here are like the latency on the RAM. It's basically, it's going to affect your speeds a good bit. If you look at like Warzone testing and Modern Warfare, high FPS games, when you jump down a step in timing, so like if you're coming from like a CL34 and you go down to a CL30, you're going to get more FPS, and the tighter timings are going to help you with the latency. That matters. So for example here, this was DDR4000, it's DDR4, but it's clock 18. Now DDR4 RAM, the timings are way different. Like clock, 18 on 4000 is not bad. But if you look at like clock 30, if you look at 3200 speed and it's clock 18, then you might want to look for something else. It's a trade-off. So when you go up in speed, you also tend to go up in the clocks too. So if you go down in speed, you can go down in the clocks. So it's kind of a trade-off, and money-wise too. So like a 4000 clock 16 kit's going to cost more than a clock 18 kit. They're also harder to find. But anyways, not diving too much deeper into that. Power supplies, look for something on the LTT tier list. I highly recommend it. That's where I found all the good stuff from. Motherboards, about the same. Watch some reviews. Watch people like Actually Hardware Overclocking on YouTube. There's quite a few YouTubers that dive deeper than what just Linus Tech Tips does or whatever. Like check out Gamers Nexus. Gamers Nexus is one of the best resources, period, flat out. That's who I have been watching for years. That's how I know most of the stuff I know. Well, I wouldn't say most of the stuff, but that's how I know a lot. I watch every video he does because it's always informative and to the point. If you're picking your processor, look at how many cores and threads it has. Like this is 12 core, 24 thread, but also look at the speed, like the clock speeds, all that good stuff. Higher clock speeds are going to be better for FPS gamers. Like basically with Intel, one of the things to look at is the generation. So like i7, everybody hears i7, i9, oh, I got an i7. Okay, well, what kind of i7? And then they don't know. It's usually not that good. If they don't know, they've got 11700K, 12700K, 10700K, and it goes all the way back to 1, and then the 970, whatever. So that's one thing to notate, is like every generation is a different number set after the i7. So like i7 12700K, this is the i7 12th gen, and this is where you want to look at, because if you're trying to put, for example, this 12700K on the Z690 board, it's going to work great for you. But if you're trying to put a 12700K on like a Z390 motherboard, it's not going to work. It's a different chipset. It's a different actual chip size and everything. Like the 12700K is longer. This is going with this board right here. This is my best friend's setup right here. We're just kind of doing a quick little video to kind of showcase on what you should look for in a build. If you're looking for a good build, take all this into consideration. If you're looking at a pre-built, the information is going to be very limited. So like Alienware, Dell, HP, any of these pre-built companies, they're going to give you to your motherboards, like literally just garbage to your motherboards. Most of the motherboards in like an Alienware case, they're going to be even longer and more narrow. The holes are going to be different, the back plate's going to be different, so you can't, like let's say you have an Alienware and your motherboard dies, you can't just replace it. You have to replace the whole entire thing. And Alienware sure isn't going to sell you another one. So basically with pre-builts, if it's certain brands, they use certain branded stuff, but also they want to cut costs and they want to cut corners. So like some of them might even use a different power supply connector, so like you wouldn't be able to buy another power supply. Some of them use very specific back plates like Alienware does. Companies like Corsair typically can use a whole number of different things. So like one thing that they might do is give you like a mini ITX motherboard. So when you go in to replace something like the cooler, if it goes bad, or anything, you might be limited on room. You might not be able to actually replace something in there. You got a lot of companies out there that will cheap out on stuff, who are very reputable companies. Well, I would say reputable, but not really, because if you look at Gamers Nexus, they get roasted nonstop, like Alienware does, and a lot of these other pre-built companies are garbage, and people just buy them. They just sell at Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, whatever. And people don't understand. They'll use it for like a day or two, leave a positive review, and it's the best thing they've ever had because they're coming from an Xbox or some garbage tier PC. So it's good to them. But then like 6 months down the road, it just catches fire and doesn't work anymore, or the performance is bad because, for example, VRMs. If you have a crappy VRM motherboard, and then you throw something like a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 or an i7, it's going to create a lot of heat, and you're going to have a lot of instability, blue screens, and all that and the other if you're not careful. Coolers, choose the right cooler for your CPU. Don't buy a cheap off-brand AIO because they have terrible pumps, they don't last long, but even some of the name brands aren't good. Air coolers, Noctua's good. And this right here, this new AK620, it's over there, that big white one up there. This is probably the best air cooler on the market. You can get the black version of this for I think about 55 bucks. It's made by Deepcool. It's a really good quality. Then you look over here and you've got your AIOs. This is an EVGA. This is a really good AIO. I really love the AIOs made by EVGA. They're very efficient, they're very good, they're very reliable. I don't have any issues with them. I keep always at least one. When you're looking at like graphics cards, you want to look at the cooler design. Like this, it's a 2-fan design, but they're bigger fans than what most people are used to. It's like a 3-fan design. The fans have to be smaller, but with a 2-fan, it's bigger, so it's gonna be quieter. The temps are great, like on this particular one. For example, like the Aorus Master, great graphics card, super expensive because it's got a little LCD on the side of it. It's pretty good. I like that. The Founders Editions are pretty good. The earlier versions had real hot VRAM temps. Generally just stuff like that. You know, I look at every component before I get it. Like for example, okay, NVMe drives, okay, there's different tiers of these. Now you've got some with a Gen 4 certification, some with, you know, Gen 3, whatever. You know, that doesn't mean much to people, right? But then you look at some that say TLC, QLC. TLC drives, basically the way the memory is laid out on here is better and faster. Just as a quick, you know, thing about it, I always go for TLC drives only. So I look at the LTT tier list. I only choose stuff on the A tier unless it's just something for storage, like something like one of these, okay? Now the Sabrent A tier, XPG was A tier, but I just didn't like it. I removed it, so now it's just a storage drive. This is one that goes in my laptop. I just pulled out some transferring data off of it. But yeah, other than that, I really think this is going to be helpful to somebody. You know, another thing like stock coolers, like a stock AMD cooler, you know, they're fine, you know, like pretty good fans. Remember we were talking about the noise here? Different sound, because this is thinner. And these are good, these are fine, but you know, this would be like something for a Ryzen 3600 or something like that. So if you're upgrading your CPU, you want to upgrade your CPU cooler as well. This gets pretty hot, and you know, this little fan right here can keep up, but this thing just gets so heat soaked after a while with something like a Ryzen 9 or a, you know, higher end Ryzen. So anyways, I'm rambling. I really hope this helps someone. If you guys have any questions, want to know about a deal, have any other questions about any of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm always open in the comments. As you can see, I comment back immediately usually. I'm always trying to help people. I love doing this. This is fun for me. I don't do it for money. I do it just for the love. I do it to share with you all. You know, this is not, you know, a new thing for me. I've been doing this for a long time. This is something I'm always very passionate about, trying to learn something different, and I'm always trying to teach people different things. You know, another thing with these motherboards too to look at, VRMs like 16 to basically like nothing to most people, but these are the stages of VRMs. So how many times like the power is filtered, things like that. So basically if you've got better power and filtering, you can have better stability for overclocking, or for like higher end CPUs, the frequency goes higher, more heat and so forth. So more stages, more better. You know, it's basically just like they say, you know, more is better. Not always, but it really does make a difference when you're looking at something for a high-end processor. So don't cheap out on your board. Don't cheap out on your power supply. These are important things that pre-builts cheap out on. And you may look at a pre-built that's literally the same spec as it's like, let's say you find a pre-built and it's got an i7 12700K and it's got 32 gigs of RAM, and you set it side by side to this one and it's a 12700K and it's got 32 gigs of RAM. I'm just using an example. I guarantee you your custom built will outperform the pre-built, because one, your temperatures are going to be way better. You're going to be able to boost higher on your frequencies, so like your clocks are like 5 gigahertz, 5.3, whatever. And then you're also going to have more FPS. More FPS, more better, right? So don't cheap out on stuff. You know, I know people are like, well, I only have this amount of money. This is just my budget. This is all I have to work with. Well, then try to find some balance between it. And another thing is cases. Don't cheap out on a case. My gosh, I wish people would stop buying those NZXT H510s, because they've only got one fan up here, and that's not enough exhaust to get rid of the heat from all your components. They create a lot of heat. So they may look like a little cute little streamer case, and I hate that, because Twitch streamers are shills for NZXT, because NZXT is shills for streamers. Blah. Don't do it. NZXT sucks. Ask my wife. She'll tell you all about it, okay? She's had every NZXT case out there because they were cute to her, and I told her, baby, they're not going to be great. So now she's got a Fantex P500A, and she friggin' loves it. That thing is a monster. Super airflow, 140mm fans on the front. Anyways, find a good case with good airflow, not a front glass panel that's all starved off and no top airflow. Get you something good. Promise you'll be happy. You won't have to worry about thermal throttling. You won't have to worry about upgrading. Your money will go farther. You should either just save up or wait for the right deal. You know, I guarantee you, if you shop creative enough, you could find the right deal. I'm a firm believer in that. There's very creative shopping methods out there. Comment below. I'll be more than happy to tell you all about them. You let me know your situation. You let me know what you're trying to find, and I'll tell you how to make it where you can afford it. I can assure you that. So with that, I'm gonna just leave it at that. I really hope everyone has a good afternoon, good evening, and good night.